Mary for the introduction. Absolutely superb start to the event. I feel so motivated to be here. It's wonderful. We're in for a great day, full of inspiration, full of innovation. And I just want to give you a brief introduction to what's about to come. We can see right now that businesses and organizations around the world are postponing and canceling in-person meetings in response to the novel coronavirus. That's affecting all of us. And organizational learning is emerging as maybe one of the hardest hit business activities. In many parts of the world, training and facilitation programs that were scheduled to take place in person within the first and second quarters of the year were now cancelled or postponed indefinitely, or maybe held virtually, with some challenges as a result of the sudden change. This challenge is brought about as a result of the pandemic, probably in as much as organizations care about the safety of their employees, they can't push the pause button on building skills and capabilities of the employees that they work with. The demands of the businesses and the organizations are still there. So the coronavirus has accelerated the adoption of digital and virtual learning programs worldwide. Adopting virtual learning programs does, however, as we all know, have its own challenges. This first session is going to deliberate on new and enhanced ways of delivering training and facilitation programs using various digital media, while ensuring maximum impact and avoiding common pitfalls. Very excited to tell you that our first speaker is Khadiga Hassan Fahmy, Senior Operations Officer at IFC. She has over 17 years experience in the design and delivery of skills development solutions for micro, small and medium enterprises. She's a key contributor to IFC's Grow, Learn, Connect platform, which supports performance and learning professionals in emerging markets to enhance their training delivery skills. And the platform's resources include IFC's Principles for Learning, Guide to Training, courses, certifications, as well as a global directory of certified trainers. What better person to start our day today? Khadiga, over to you.
Thank you, Edmund, for this great introduction, and thank you, Margaret, for inviting me to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, which is making sure training programs are effective. And good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'll open up my presentation. Sorry. Okay, so let me go on. I hope you all can see the presentation. So I want to start by showing some numbers which basically speak for themselves. According to the UN, $20 billion are spent every year on capacity building in emerging markets. And according to the OECD, $1 billion are spent on technical assistance to small and medium enterprises. So it's very important to ensure that capacity building programs, and more specifically training programs, are designed and developed by learning and performance professionals in emerging markets in an effective way and can provide return on investment to all those involved. There are 4 factors that have an impact on training program effectiveness. The first factor is program design. This is the approach used to deliver the training, whether classroom only or handbook plus coaching or online, self-study, etc. This will have an impact on training effectiveness. Even if you use the same approach, so even let's say you use classroom-based training, there will be variations that will affect the outcomes. So for example, let's imagine 2 classroom-based programs. The first is several hours of lecture with an occasional stop for questions, and the other uses small lectures interspersed with activities that allow the learner to practice the skills. Because the first relies on passive learning, it is more likely to have a lower uptake rate than the latter. The second factor is training project management. Let's take 2 project teams. One team takes time to conduct a training needs assessment and to think about what the success of the training program will look like going forward. The other team puts together a training program very quickly, 2 weeks before the delivery, without a full understanding of the needs of the target group. Which training project do you think is going to make a bigger impact? Most likely the one that is well planned out. The third factor that affects training program effectiveness is the training provider. So basically, trainers have a big impact on the success of training programs. Their facilitation skills are key. However, it's not just the trainers that make a difference, but also the instructional designers that also affect the success, especially with respect to program design. The fourth factor is the post-training support that is offered. So post-training support needs to be built into the program. People forget what they do not use regularly. So support interventions like SMS reminder messages, coaching, peer support groups that bring learning back to the forefront of the learner's mind and hold them accountable to use it are important to have. So having said that, it's important to make available to learning and performance professionals, i.e. trainers, instructional designers, staff involved in training delivery, such as project management staff, capacity building programs and tools that will enable them to grow their skills. As such, the International Finance Corporation has launched the Grow, Learn, Connect platform with the goal of raising effectiveness of training around the world. Grow, Learn, Connect platform offers 3 categories of services and products. Basically, if you go to the platform and you have the website on the slide, the link to the website on the slide, you will find a guide to training and principles of learning, which we developed in partnership with the Institute for Performance and Learning in Canada. Together, the principles and the guide provide the best practices for every stage of the training life cycle that training providers and training project
Delegate, sorry, we have dropped Khadiga, but I think she's sorting out technology, and we believe she's going to be back shortly. Let's just give her a couple of minutes. I am sure she will be coming back shortly. We are also blessed to have Edmund, who is moderating this session. Edmund, as we wait for Khadiga, probably you might have a few things to tell us as we wait for her. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks, Laban. Yeah, I'm sure Khadiga will sort this out shortly. What I'm interested in hearing already from Khadiga is how, I think we're about to hear how things have been adapted within the organization and the models that have been used. It's also interesting to find how people are moving from that face-to-face model that historically has worked so well for decades, actually, and starting to combine technology with individual approaches to learning and development. And what I mean by that is, there are motivations for individual learners to want to go and learn, and how they do that has changed dramatically. I'll touch on this later in my session. So I'm really interested to find out from Khadiga how IFC have managed to adapt in this environment as an example of an organization with, a worldwide presence. I'm sure we'll learn more about that on the breakout sessions as well later on. You'll hear also about the importance of using data effectively from people like Kevin Yates, who were delighted to have join us, and I know is on this right now. Kevin will be talking about how we can use data effectively to create effective learning as well. So, double efficacy, if you like. Also, we've got a number of other speakers who I'm sure you're going to be enjoying, who will be furthering this topic, looking at trends that we're seeing around the world. So you've got a real global presence here on the panel and within the sessions. And I think we must remember, if we remember nothing else towards the end of this day, that Margaret's opening statement around, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. I'm a firm believer that hybrid environment of people and technology is the best route to optimal performance for both an organization and for individuals. So I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts there, just while we sort out the technical issues with Khadiga, and hopefully we'll have her back shortly. Thanks, Laban.
Ed, thank you so much for those insights. And I think we have lost Khadiga. Ed would request that you continue with the panelists. Over to you, Ed.
No problem at all. And I'm sure we'll hear from Khadiga. We can get her back, and we can have the final sort of 5 minutes of that session. But we've got an amazing panel together. I'm so excited about this and really looking forward, as I said earlier, to learning from the panel myself, as well as Khadiga, who we hope to welcome back shortly. We have Gillian Shapiro, who's the CEO and founder of Shapiro Consulting. Really strong focus on gender and learning, which is a huge focus of the OPIs as well. So I'm, as I say, excited to hear from Gillian. Gillian's a highly experienced organizational culture and change consultant, over 20 years of specialist experience in inclusion and diversity. She works with women, supporting their development into and through leadership careers, and with leaders and employees at all levels to develop their capabilities, building high-performing, inclusive and diverse teams within often fast-changing and complex work environments. What an amazing person to have on the panel. Currently working with the International Labour Organization in reviewing approaches to diversity and inclusion in companies globally as well. And as if that wasn't enough, prior to that, she has led pan-European action research programs on innovation, employee diversity and engagement at the Center for Research and Innovation Management. Should be an inspirational person to have on this. We're also welcomed by Tom Newman, head of MENA and Africa for LinkedIn Learning Solutions. Maybe a role model for the way learning is moving. His focus is on learning and development, the value proposition of that. Tom's passionate about building world-class teams, helping companies transform and creating economic opportunity for professionals. Based in Ireland, he leads the LinkedIn Learning Solutions business for Middle East and Africa, and his teams are responsible for acquiring new customers and working with existing customers. His journey, which is incredible, has saw LinkedIn grow from 300 to 700 million members. and from 4,000 to 14,000 employees. I think even that has increased since this was written, actually. So outstanding. The acquisitions of lynda.com and Glint and the acquisition of LinkedIn by Microsoft has seen that exponential growth. Tom has a rich understanding of the talent ecosystem, so we'll welcome Tom shortly. Wale Ajiboye, Associate Director, Acumen West Africa, is also joining, a social entrepreneur with over 19 years experience in enterprise development, not-for-profit management, and social innovation. He's passionate about entrepreneurship and has immersed himself in helping entrepreneurs discover their creative genius, innovate, and think globally. So I may have to have a conversation with you myself, Wale, after this. Currently works as an associate director with Acumen West Africa, where he oversees the implementation of the Acumen Academy in the region. He's been involved in a number of projects as well, like the Chivas Regal's Venture Fund and HP's Life Project in Nigeria. Thokozile Lewanka Mpupuni also joins us, Group Head of Leadership, Learning and Talent at the Absa Group, South Africa. Her focus is on leadership and today's specific challenges. Thokozile is currently the Group Head of Leadership, Learning and Talent for Absa Group and holds a PhD from UCT, and her experiences include heading up leadership, talent and organizational design at Discovery, as well as at Novartis, and being an expert consultant at McKinsey Company. And finally, hopefully we're joined by Alhassan Andani, a Ghanaian economist, current CEO of Stanbic Bank Ghana. A master's degree in banking and finance from FinAfrica Institute in Milan, an alumnus of the Oxford Strategic Leadership Programme, and holding an international management certificate from INSEAD, the Chartered Bank. What an incredible panel. So, Gillian, if I may, I'd like to start with you. In their 2017 Women in the Workplace report, leanin.org and McKinsey & Co. found that when, and this is a quote, a direct quote, when men believe their organizations prioritize gender diversity because it leads to better business results, they are significantly more likely to think it matters. In the same vein, when men think companies prioritize gender diversity because it is fair to all people, they're more likely to be personally committed. Could you share with us some of the gender structures and notions that affect workplace learning in 2020, and also perhaps explain to us how we can make sure women are not being left behind? How do we practically ensure that they are on the learning journey? Gillian.
Thanks, Ed. First of all, it's an absolute honour to be with you, Ed, and with everybody here today. There is much for me to learn in this conference, and I'm learning already from what I've heard rather. So thank you. I'm also smiling because what a big question to start this panel discussion with. So I'll try to add some content to that for everyone, Ed. So I think I would begin by helping us all think about the gendered structures, if you like, that you referred to, Ed, just to put us in some context here, because the world of work is gendered. It's predominantly being created by men for men, and we operate not within a vacuum. We also operate within wider societies, policies and structures that are also gendered. So we're often in workplace learning really swimming against the stream here. And it has all sorts of implications. So there is no shortage of women that want to work, that want to progress their career. Globally, women are educated to degree level in equal numbers to men very often, and in some areas in greater numbers than men. But at the same time, there are enormous inequalities, if you like, disadvantages. Women still globally have less access to quality of work, the same quality of work as men, in less good conditions, with unequal pay. I think in the last report I read, globally, across different countries, it will take between 30 and 300 years to reach equal pay levels between men and women, which is just mind-blowing, really. Women still, in most countries in the world, are dominating in caregiving roles. And actually, the pandemic has accentuated the impact of this, as many women are homeschooling more often than men, and retaining their responsibilities at work. And we still see far fewer women than men in managerial and particularly in leadership positions. This has nothing to do with ability or lack of ambition. So workplace learning has an enormous role to play in this. And actually, I heard Margaret talk about entrepreneurship, and I also wanted to mention that, because often women will leave their organisations, not because they're giving up on their careers, quite the opposite, but actually because often they get frustrated with the blocks in their opportunities for learning, development and career, and set up their own businesses. And even then we face inequalities in access to finance, in access to opportunities for learning and development, and networking, which is also important. So there are lots of implications for workplace learning and learning and development. And I almost want to say, I'm sure we'll come back to different questions, Ed, but I actually think it's really important for workplace learning to look inward first, to look at ourselves first. Because although there are many women, often in equal numbers within L&D, workplace learning, L&D functions at the top level are often also predominated by men. So I think it's even important to understand the extent to which we're hearing the voices of women and men within workplace learning. And what we know from research is when teams include at least one person that reflects the customer. So let's talk about learners as the customers, as the client in this situation. It improves the experience of that customer or that client. So it's important for us in workplace learning to think, who are we involving in the design of learning? Who are we involving in making decisions on where and how workplace learning takes place, be it face-to-face, albeit in blended situations. As we're experiencing here today, access to technology is not always easy or equally available. So I think it's important for L&D to look inward, who are in those, who have strong voices, who's being listened to, and to look inward, because I think L&D has such an important role to play in supporting wider organisations to better understand these gender dimensions. So right at the beginning of your question, Ed, you talked about McKinsey and Lean In and those findings, and the importance of the business case for equality in work. And there is such an enormous business case for this. It's been very well set out by McKinsey and many others. But what research also shows us is that whilst leaders often say they understand the importance of equality in the workplace and in learning, actually what we're finding is they're still not doing enough of.
I think we may have lost Gillian there for a moment, which is a shame, because I think we were just about to hear how practically organizations are moving forward. But some startling facts there and opinions. I think it's between 30 and 300 years to reach equal pay for women in roles in business is absolutely terrible, obviously. And I know here at the LPI, we have an exact 50-50 split on men and women working in the organization. And for conferences such as this, we ensure that panels have at least a 50-50 split actually in favor of women. It's so important. Another interesting point that Gillian makes there as well is that the facts are there to prove that this actually adds value. So, there are no excuses here at all. It's we can change this, and I believe things are moving in the right direction. There are so many movements happening around the world to support this. But equally, I agree with Gillian, who's obviously an expert in this area, that we must start with our own organizations and look inwardly, ask ourselves the questions. Are we giving women the right opportunities? I know Gillian's sent me a message. She can hear me, but we can't hear or see her. I'll be able to see when you join again, Gillian, and I'd love to ask you a follow-on question as soon as you're back in. But maybe we can, take some time to reflect after this event and ask ourselves, are we providing women with the right opportunities in our organization? Is it at least as easy for women to access learning and to develop? Do they have the same career opportunities? How many women are in leadership positions in our organizations? And I thought that quote from McKinsey was so apt for this, because this is not just something that is born out of a new wave of desired equality. This also works. So no excuses, as I say. I will come back to Julian because I do have a follow-on question around the practicalities of that, and is it even possible to do this? And maybe she has some examples of organizations that are doing this well as well. But Tom, I'm sure you'll accept, if I can move on to you, Tom, you'll accept that this is a critical issue, and we've all seen evidence, hopefully we have anyway, that gender diversity does lead to better business results. But it's also true, isn't it, that L&D functions themselves seem to experience a kind of perennial issue of existential validation. I feel like heads of L&D and CLOs that I'm talking to are always having to prove that what they're doing is adding value. So in that context, you're in a privileged position there to be able to tell us, what are you seeing in terms of executive buy-in for L&D functions? And where there is a lack of that, how can value be effectively communicated? Is it easy or is it difficult? Tom, I'd welcome your thoughts.
Skills people need to learn in this time. I think we're seeing that today in terms of the panel and some of the tech challenges. So if I do drop, please let me know. I probably will be the last person to know that I have dropped.
Thank you, Tom.
So just to first of all say, actually a huge thank you to Margaret and team for putting on this conference. It isn't easy to put on a conference, especially a virtual one that welcomes so many people. So thank you so much for doing so. And it was genuinely a shame to not catch the end of what Gillian was sharing, because it's clearly such an important topic. So thank you so much for all that's been shared so far. I do hope that she can come back on. And Ed, just a +1 on one of your comments earlier as well about the importance of us thinking about people and technology. The future isn't one or the other. It's about both of them, particularly when it comes to learning. To answer your question, I'll sort of try and break into two parts, because there's some really interesting stuff that I can share around trends that we're seeing when it comes to executive buy-in. And I've brought with me, a few pretty interesting examples of how we're seeing different organizations capture the value of their learning, plus, being from LinkedIn Learning. I, of course, will have a whole raft of data that I can share as well, but I don't want to bamboozle, hopefully, everybody with too many numbers. So let's get in a little bit, first of all, to this question about executive buy-in. And, we've seen an interesting evolution. And in fact, I would go so far as to say, I think we've seen a recent revolution when it comes to executive buy-in in L&D. So let's go back in time a little bit, first of all. So let me take you back to 2014. So in 2014, the PwC CEO survey said that worldwide, 63% of CEOs said that they were concerned that a lack of essential skills in their workforce was threatening the future growth of their organization. Let's go forward in time a little bit. 2019, that same survey, or rather the 2019 version, by now we'd gone from 63% of CEOs being concerned up to 79%. Now, there are some obvious drivers there, right? Things like digital transformation, such as the much talked about impacts of the fourth industrial revolution. But of course, skills development is of heightened importance in regions where we see a net export of talent, a net export of skills, which of course is something we see in many countries in Africa. Now, these findings from PwC, they kind of align with what we found ourselves. So we released at the start of this year our annual workplace learning report. And interestingly, we heard from L&D professionals, from 83% of them, they said, we have executive buy-in. But here's the interesting thing. Only 27% of them stated that their CEO was actively championing learning. And then this year happened, right? And this has been a year like no other, where a huge amount of things have happened. But what we've seen is that L&D has taken center stage. So in the middle of the year, in May time, we launched another report, which was our Leading with Learning report. And we found now that the number of CEOs actively championing learning had gone from 27% to a whopping 70%. And that 62% of L&D professionals said that they now had a seat in the C-suite. 62%. Now that was up from 24% from right back at the start of the year. So of course the main driver here is about how companies have been responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact of this really was to move L&D from the fringes to help, in fact, the business navigate this unprecedented time and this course that lay ahead. Now, it may not surprise anybody that's with us today to know that in our report, 60% of L&D professionals said that their learning culture was stronger now than it was pre-COVID. So if we consider here just the non-essential worker roles, like my own, for example, that in many countries were moved to home working or to flexible working, it fell on L&D to help people become proficient on the tools that were required to work remotely. It fell on L&D to help people to manage their time effectively when working from home. And it fell on L&D to help people to manage themselves, to manage their mental health, and to manage their well-being as we adjusted to this new normal, and as we will continue having to adapt as well. You know, interestingly, overall, we saw that employees spent 130% more time learning in the first few months of this year compared to pre-COVID. And actually, showing some regional data, that number in South Africa was an increase of 200%. Huge. So if I hit kind of the second part of the question, which was a bit around how are we showing the value of learning? And, you know, Ed, it's a very topical question because, of course, this increased executive attention on L&D has put greater scrutiny than ever in terms of the impact of learning. But even before now, going back to our workplace learning report that I mentioned earlier, released at the start of this year, we heard that the number one strategic focus for L&D professionals this year, most commonly, was exactly on that point. We need to show the impact of our learning programs. But what we also heard was this. There's a lot of different ways that are being used right now. So let me share some data first of all. So the methods, the most common ways to capture learning that we're hearing companies are doing right now. The two most common qualitative ones, and again, this won't surprise anybody. The first is qualitative feedback from the employees about the learning. And the second is qualitative feedback from the employees' managers about behavioral change that they've observed in their employees since that learning. From a quantitative perspective, now this is a little bit more e-learning specific, But the quantitative measures we're most often hearing are things like the number of courses completed and number of repeat learners, and that's kind of ever getting a little bit stronger. But that's kind of the data from a snapshot in time. What I wanted to share today, because I think there's some really good stuff in here that people can take away, is sharing maybe 3 or 4, probably even more like 4 examples of some of the most innovative stuff I'm hearing right now from our customers. So if it's okay, I'm going to share just a couple of these as well. And the first one of these is L&D show the impact on how they're building employee capabilities for the future. Now, if we think back to what I was talking about a moment ago with the PwC report, with the CEO survey, talking about the need to develop these essential skills, but also some of the African countries typically being talent and skills exporters. The importance here is L&D showing their impact by how many business critical roles have been filled by internal mobility because of the L&D journey. And related to this is also L&D showing how they're accelerating the leadership succession pipeline within their organization. Another example that we're often seeing, of course, is the use of big data from e-learning platforms like LinkedIn, where companies can start to track the number of skills that have been gained by employees that very specifically line up to company priorities, and also by skills benchmarking, comparing the skills inventory within their organization to peer companies. And I'll bring us home with one last one as well, which we're seeing more and more of all the time, which is the increased usage of employee engagement surveys. So platforms such as Glint, to start to use that to help identify what are the areas for L&D intervention. And of course, we can then correlate employee engagement back to things like productivity calculations and attrition.
Absolutely fascinating, Tom. Thanks for sharing that. In fact, while you were talking, it reminded me of something that I read a couple of days ago. If we think that L&D isn't big business right now, and I know you're advocating that it is, and it's critical, it's worth noting that in America, there's a new SEC regulation that's just come into force, which actually requires even more effort by chief learning officers and chief people officers to quantify the human capital in their organizations and what they're doing to nurture and develop it. So I'm just going to touch on that a bit more, if that's all right, Tom, with you. One of the roles of the SEC is to ensure that companies report regularly on all factors in their business. So it's about the value of a business as assessed by investors. And your statistics were fantastic. I'll come back at you, if you like, with one of mine here. In 1975, 83% of stock value was represented by the physical assets of a company. And by 2015, so 5 years ago, this had changed so that 84% of value was represented by the human capital in the company. And the SEC has just now mandated reporting on human capital. So investing in learning is big business. Do we think companies are getting it right, Tom? Could I ask you that follow-on question?
I think it's a very broad and a very deep question, Ed, and I think it can depend hugely upon the business. But I think often what we're starting to see is that L&D has begun to move from being a subset of something that sits under HR, a reactive function that the business goes to when there's a problem to fix, to instead actually really being part of the different functional units of the business, right? And actually being much more proactive in working with these different parts of the business, different functions, different business lines, to understand L&D's role with that business for the year ahead and helping them achieve their objectives. So, that's just anecdotal. There's no data really supporting that point, but it's something that we're increasingly hearing. So I think that kind of touches a little bit on what you're saying. I think we've also seen more roles that have come into existence. So that might be things like chief people officers. And the last piece, I think, in answer to this as well, is we're seeing some different partnerships start to brew within L&D as well. So I'll share a specific example. And actually, this is an example from LinkedIn, but we've kind of seen it elsewhere as well, which is, two big trends this year, response to COVID. But we've also seen a massive raise in the importance when it comes to things like diversity and inclusion. So we've seen obviously a lot of more roles start to exist, like diversity officer. Mm-hmm. But it's the partnership between them. What businesses have quickly seen is if their D&I function is working in a silo, that can have sometimes a limited impact, of course, when businesses are really wanting to make progress against different diversity objectives. And we know that L&D, if it's operating in a silo, is only going to have limited impact. So the specific example I want to share with you is at LinkedIn a number of months ago, our L&D team had one of their core focuses for the year was about, we really want to develop world-class leaders. Now, we call it the DIBS team, so diversity, inclusion and belonging. One of the things that they found was that one of the biggest impacts for us to retain diverse talent was around the level of inclusivity they felt within their team, by their manager, by the function that they were in. So we actually saw these two functions come together to create a new program at LinkedIn called Inclusive Leadership, which is a program I'm going through myself at the moment. It's pretty humbling to realize how far that I have to go. So to come back to your question, do we think that talent is being seen as more critical to businesses? I think so. We often hear things like talent is our number one operating priority. We're seeing new roles being developed. We're seeing L&D become a proactive, business critical player working with the different functions. But I think it's this partnerships piece that's going to make a massive difference there as well. Ed, I could probably talk at length about this a little bit more, but those are some of the things that I would sort of come back at you with in terms of what's in my mind for that.
I really appreciate that. Invaluable stuff, Tom. Thanks for taking the follow-on question as well. I promised not to drop you in it, but I thought I'd give you the opportunity to ask that one. So it's great to hear from you. And Thokozile, I think this leads nicely onto you actually in your role as Group Head of Leadership, Learning and Talent. Tom was talking about all of those. Would you be able to define to us your view of the purpose of an L&D function, and especially in what you're doing? And has that changed recently? Thokozile, are you with us? Maybe having a few issues with Thokozile there. So what I will do is, because you touched on diversity and inclusion, Tom, and the DIBS team that you've got there, it made me want to just go back to Gillian for a second, if Gillian's with us. Gillian, can you hear me okay?
Hi, Ed. Yes, I can.
Hi, Gillian. Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask you before until we unfortunately lost you. Could you maybe perhaps give us one practical tip? There was a lot of information you gave us, and maybe you didn't hear what I was saying after we lost you. But, it seems a sorry state of affairs in many organizations. And yet I'm hoping that we're witnessing a shift in this. What is one practical tip that you could give companies to allow them or empower them to be more inclusive, please?
I'm smiling again at your question, Ed, because it's a big change with one small tip. I actually couldn't agree more with what Tom was saying about the positioning of L&D and the positioning of diversity and inclusion. I see that all the time, that when it's separate, when it's a side issue, its impact really struggles. These are core issues. Diversity and inclusion runs through absolutely everything an organisation does. So one really important tip would be, don't make it separate, don't make it a side issue. Thread it through everything your organisation does, every decision, every strategy, every part of your culture. And if I may, I'd put in a couple of other tips, which are really around behaviours, because essentially inclusion is a behavioural issue. And I would say two things are incredibly important. The first is to be curious, because we often get things wrong around diversity because we're making assumptions about what other people need or want. And actually all we have to do is stand in inquiry, is to be curious and ask people. So often senior leaders in organisations think that the things that are preventing women from accessing learning, from accessing work, are really quite different to what women themselves say the issues are. So we just need to ask the people that we're not accessing well what is needed. And then the other thing is courage. We need courage to do things differently. I go back to Margaret's introduction again. COVID has taught us very, very well that we can do things differently if we're really pushed to do so. Courage is needed in this space to think and act differently. And I'm going to stick a third one in just quickly.
Go ahead.
Accountability, Ed. We all need to take responsibility for making changes in whatever area of responsibility that we hold.
I'm so glad you said that, because it was going to be an additional question I was going to put to you, because courage and curiosity can start with the individual, I'm sure, but organizations have a responsibility for this. They're employing these people. And I was going to ask you about accountability, but you've touched on it so eloquently, I need not. But I would, first of all, I would obviously echo what you're saying. And again, we know that this actually works, if we give people the freedom to do this. There was a Google project, I think it was Archimedes, I'm sure somebody will correct me if it isn't, but they looked at Google at what creates a successful team. And the number one thing that created a successful team was psychological safety. People having the freedom to be courageous, be curious, and offer their opinions on things, regardless of their role within a company. I think that's so important. And thank you. I've made some important notes here. I think you're right. Culture is key. And giving people the opportunity to be curious is so important. And it leads me nicely. Hopefully we've got Wale with us. Following on from these comments from Gillian, you have a wealth of experience in helping people discover their creative genius and innovate, giving people that freedom, I guess. We know that the value L&D can provide is inextricably linked with the skills within that team. Are there new ways in which you're seeing employees being upskilled, reskilled when budgets are tight? Is it harder now to talk about the value of learning? Maybe the first questions first. Are there ways in which you're seeing employees being upskilled when budgets are tight? Wale, are you with us? I don't think we can hear from Wale at the moment. So I might return actually, because it's in a similar vein. Khadiga, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So one of the question I was going to ask Wale there was around, how are you seeing employees being upskilled and reskilled when budgets are tight? But it kind of leads me nicely to what I was going to ask you right at the beginning of this session, which was, how can companies now pivot to maybe more cost-effective versions of learning? I presume, we're thinking things like virtual classroom. Could you share your experience with us?
Yes, yes, definitely. So I think the idea would be to take a phased approach. So that's something we did, rather than trying to engage in a full-fledged development of online training delivery. We started to take some of the face-to-face courses we had and converting them at a low cost in an easy way to online. So I would say, in the first phase, look at what your key courses are, because I know that many organizations, having spoken to training academies within organizations or training providers, their business almost came to a halt, especially if they were delivering mainly classroom-based. So the first approach would be take those key courses that you've been selling and transfer them to online delivery. With low technology use, so you may only need a video conferencing facility that can give you some functionalities like breakout rooms, and then convert the material to a webinar or online workshop format. So it's still instructor-led but delivered online. So I'll give an example. We had a one-day training that we converted into two-hour online workshops or webinars. To do that, we transferred some of the content to assignments that were given to participants to do in between those webinars or online workshops. And we produced a participant handbook to guide the participants through the course that they could also take as reference back to their workplace. And we delivered all that using just the WebEx training platform. So that's an easy way to move quickly. We were able to do all that within maybe 3 to 4 weeks. the second phase, I would say, is then to start to really think through, what do your clients need? How is this going to look a year from now? What's your vision for the online? We know that, online now in the new normal is going to be, people will have gotten used to it, clients will have gotten used to it, and it will definitely be part of the offering going forward. You may go back to classroom-based training in part, but there will always be now online along with it. So you need to develop your skills and you need to think about your offer. So I would say the second phase would be, thinking about your vision, your objective, developing a strategy, developing an action plan for where you want to take your online programs and where do you see them in the future, and then building your skills and the skills of your team around designing of online self-study courses or instructor-led courses or blended courses. Learning some of the tools that you need. You may need to learn tools like Articulate, for instance, and other tools. And you may eventually even need a learning management system as well. So I would say in the second phase, it's really think about the skills and competencies you and your team need once you've developed your strategy, and start to develop those skills. And just to go back to the last part of the presentation where I was cut off, sorry for the connectivity issues there. A lot of these courses are offered on our IFC's platform, the Grow, Learn, Connect platform. And we've designed courses on how to engage participants online, how to develop content for online as well as face-to-face, so instructional design courses. And we are planning to develop courses as well for each part of the training life cycles, from how to do training needs assessment to how to assess the performance, evaluate the impact of training. So all those courses will be available. Some of them are instructor-led, some of them are self-study, but they're all going to be available on the Grow, Learn, Connect platform, and some of them are already on there for you to take.
Thank you, Khadiga. That's incredibly insightful. Thank you. So much information there, really useful. And I can see that the chat, while you're talking, is getting really intense on the side there. So just a reminder that we can tweet and share what we're doing in these sessions using the hashtag L&D Africa Conf 2020. You can check that out in the chat if you may be looking for the spelling of what I've said there. And also you can click on the invite button and share with a friend or any social media page such as LinkedIn. Wale, can I just check? Wale, sorry, can I check, are you with us? Okay, I don't think we have Wale back yet, but we did have a question within the chat actually. Any tips on creating a culturally sensitive organization, which was from a second, I think. Does anybody want to take that? Gillian, perhaps you might want to come back on that. How can we create a culturally sensitive organization? And to be controversial, should we create a culturally sensitive organization?
I think my short answer to your final question is yes, we should. We are as a global community in this amazing conference in Africa, and we are so connected. If we have learnt nothing else over the last few months, we are an incredibly connected and culturally diverse continent and globe. So I think cultural sensitivity is important in order to give voice and space for different identities, different voices, different identities, different styles to flourish within an organisation. I think Tom talked about this as well, about the performance of teams. If we all operate in the same way, we're going to really struggle to innovate, to solve problems, to move forward. So I think this is what diversity and inclusion gives us. How to create cultural sensitivity is, I think this starts with the absolute strategic intention from the top. I keep coming back to leadership, and that's because in most of our organisations it is the importance of leadership. So to approach this really as a culture change program is essential. It is core to an organisation. So often we see organisations run initiatives or programs, and often they're fairly impactful with the group of people that they're working with at the time. But what they struggle to do is create any systemic, longer lasting, sustainable change. So cultural sensitivity has to be positioned as part of core strategic culture change work. And that requires real accountability, as we talked about before, but real intention from the very top, from leadership or wherever levels of leadership are within that environment.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And presumably that starts with when you talk about the strategic intention of leadership around this subject of inclusivity, presumably it starts with inclusivity at the very top, right?
Yeah, it's it's really I'm running a program myself, Ed, at the moment, which I'm also running virtually, which is an amazing experience. And we really we bring reciprocity into the program. So we are bringing senior leaders together with more junior people in an organisation to work on culture change. And the reason we're doing that is because, of course, both groups have much to learn and both groups have much to give each other. So there is a danger with leadership operating within a bubble that is disconnected from the experience of others who may be different and have a different experience to them within the organisation. So I am myself experimenting and exploring and working with groups of people, and amazingly doing this in the virtual environment, where we're working to find our way through cultural sensitivity and understanding and culture change together.
Yeah, it's a huge debate as well, actually. Certainly in the UK and Europe, which is where I tend to work mainly at the moment, around can we create a learning culture? Is it possible to create a culture? I think you can foster and engender a culture, but maybe not create one. It takes, as you say, which is a word I rarely hear used in L&D terms, but reciprocity. It's a combination of staff and leaders doing that. So yeah, I may ask you that question away from this event, actually, as maybe some examples of organizations that have been able to do this well. I definitely think that the onus is on people like me, actually, where I host conferences, host awards events. We need to make sure that the panel of judges is well represented and diverse. My team is, the board is, conference sessions that we run, things like this. Great to hear Margaret opening. Great to hear your thoughts on these events. I just don't see it personally as a problem. I don't see that it creates a problem having women involved in these things. I just think it adds so much. I'm amazed that it's still an issue, and I'm delighted to have you on this panel talking about exposing some of these issues, but also highlighting organizations and strategies that can be implemented. I'm hoping that either, Wale, we can try for one last time, maybe on that subject of building a learning culture. What is your experience, as I said earlier, in terms of, are you witnessing people being upskilled and reskilled in different ways? If you're not there, Wale, I'll move to Tom. Wale, are you there with us? Yeah, I'm afraid I still can't hear you, Wale. So I'll move to Tom. If Tom's still with us, I'm hoping Tom from LinkedIn Learning is still with us. I might be able to touch on that topic of building a learning culture. Is it possible to do that? Is it possible to create a learning culture, Tom? Maybe we're having issues with Tom as well. I think I can offer my thoughts on this, actually. Obviously, the LPI is a global institute, and maybe Tom's with us. I'll just add a little bit more to this before I ask you, Tom, to answer. You talked about the challenges that L&D are facing, and I was really fascinated by that, scribbling notes away on the right-hand side here. The LPI, we survey thousands of chief learning officers around the world, and the top challenge that came back was how to build a learning culture. The second biggest challenge for the people we asked was the digital transformation of the L&D function. I know I'm putting you on the spot here, and thank you for taking an additional question, but A, is it possible to create a learning culture? And B, can digital technology be used to help in that scenario?
Ed, I love the question. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to say that absolutely, yes, it's possible to build a learning culture on the basis that one of the data points I shared earlier was just that 60% of L&D professionals said they had a stronger learning culture now than pre-COVID. And I think that also kind of answers your second part as well, which was, well, now that we're perhaps more remote or more digitally focused in learning, has this hampered somehow the learning culture? Well, actually, we've kind of seen the opposite. Now, again, I don't need to preach to the choir around the movement from creating content to curating it, moving from ILT to VILT plus, some online learning as well. But, I think that our understanding of a culture of learning has changed. But what I think is kind of curious as well is if you ask L&D professionals what a culture of learning is, how do you define it, how do you measure it, you quite often get back different answers. So I think sometimes it makes a bit of sense to deconstruct, well, what are we actually referring to? And then you can target in the organization perhaps what needs to be done. I'll give you an example. One of the things that's critical to a culture of learning is it being talked about by the C-suite? And if you want to go a stage further than that, are they role modeling it? Not are they telling people to learn and why they should learn, but are they learning themselves and telling people about what they have been learning? So I think that's one really important piece in there, right? Is not just is the executives bought in, are they championing, are they role modeling? With any change management program in an organization, you've got to get your frontline managers involved because they're the bit between the executives and the grassroots of the organization. They're going to be a change agents or they're going to block things from happening. So managers are going to be critical to have involved, whether that means giving them the ability to do things like content curation themselves, or at least driving accountability of the mandated training. I would challenge managers, they can go a little bit further than that. If as a people leader, right, I'm close to my team. I know their career aspirations. I'm pretty aware of development areas. And therefore, I should be focusing with them on recommending to them learning as well as providing coaching. So there's a super important layer that sits there across managers. And the last thing that I would put in here is, well, what's the employee experience like? Because you know what, if we're providing them a lousy experience, they're not going to be inspired to learn. If we're telling them that learning happens outside of the core hours of their job, we are showing them that it's not a priority. So I think those are some of the things that I would hit. One last thing that I'll put in here as well is the importance of marketing. We know more and more of the job of L&D professionals is marketing. Now, that might be about dressing up some of the push learning that must be done, but it's also about making learning more exciting. So we've seen really fun things happening around calendars and seasonal marketing. So for the regions that would celebrate Christmas, for example, we've seen campaigns around 12 steps of learning for Christmas. For regions that would take part in Halloween, we've seen some great stuff around what are you scared of as a campaign. Fall in love, right? Valentine's Day. There can be so much creativity where marketing get involved, but you've got to put yourself in the shoes of a learner. I am at work. I'm probably busy. I'm probably distracted. What's in it for me in my busy day to take time out to learn something which will probably only be of value to me later? Now, of course, there's a separate track in this, which is about how do we build learning into the flow of work? So employees don't sit there helpless in a situation or wait for their next manager meeting or this training that's scheduled in a month. The mindset is to take action and learn right now from the resources available. So I know, again, Ed, I've covered a whole range of different things on this topic, but it's a meaty question that does have a lot of facets to it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you've answered it so well. I think you're right. The emphasis has shifted to the learner. There was a question on the floor as well about how L&D engages with IT, but I'm hoping maybe I can see Wale. I'm going to do this one last time. I'm keeping my fingers crossed because I'm really hoping to hear from Wale. I can see you're there. If you can unmute, that would be great. And I'd like to ask you a question.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Wale. So good
great,
that you could join us right at the last. You're like an 80th minute substitute being brought on to score the winning goal. So pleased to hear you. Are you seeing new ways in which employees are being reskilled and upskilled? That was a question that I was really wanting to ask you.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, what I was thinking to myself with what has happened with COVID is who are the people that are winning today? And when I think about a smaller organization that appears to be learning on the go and more fluid and more flexible and even more open to learning, there is something to learn from that. Now, the bigger organizations that we've seen in the world today have nice budgets, they have ways, they have a whole full team that they want to use to, create some sort of learning culture. But if you think about the companies that are really doing well today, the companies that appears to be winning today, particularly what we are seeing, we've seen that the smaller companies appears to be more fluid and have created a culture where every opportunity to learn is there. And so the thing is, how do we become creative? How do we become creative as L&D specialists to be able to create not just events and programs that would come in at particular sequence, but how do we create a culture within the organization? For me, I think the future is how do we help organizations create learning moments at every point in time where it's needed, and not just at moments where we think that we're looking for, how do we improve our staff? How do we respond quickly to what is happening within the organization? But how do we help them do it in a way where, whether it's in meetings, whether it's in conversation, whether it's in what we're doing? And I think that's one of the ways that we have to start thinking about it. How do we create a more fluid system that allows learning to happen on the go? Looking at the reality of how things are changing fast. And I think that's what's really helping. For us in our organization, we learn every day. Every Monday, every Tuesday, we're always having something to do. And even if it's just a short 30 minutes or 1 hour conversation we're having, we're always thinking, what are we learning that would impact our work? And I think for us, for the future, we have to find those creative ways where we can infuse training, infuse conversation, infuse tools and resources that can allow people to be curious and be creative about the world we're entering into now.
Fascinating. Thank you, Wale. I mean, I agree with you again. I mean, what a great session so far. We've got a few minutes left, but yes, we have to be agile. I'll touch on this in this afternoon's session. That North Star of driving profit for shareholders, things are changing and we need to be more agile and think about our learners. Do you have any tips perhaps on how to trigger learning that benefits everyone? That was a question that came up in the chat on the side, Wale. Are there any ways? I think Tom looked at marketing, was touching on the marketing of L&D. How do we get people to even want to do it? Any tips there?
No, I think the reality is that I think there's a lot more that we have to think about in how we customize programs. I think at the moment we fall into this trap of, because it's working, what we have created or the learning we are creating or the training we're creating for organizations seems to be, I saw one comment that talks about when we get feedback, we use, how did the training go and all of those things. But how does it impact the business? I think we have to start thinking creatively how our training aligns to the reality of the organization and the industry. And until we think about those things that allows us to be customized properly and say, what exactly are we seeing in this industry? What is going on in the world today? And have business cases that allows us to be able to customize these things properly, we would continue to have problems. There are no simple answers to it. I think there are no simple answers to it. I think the reality is, how do we get creative and understanding where the market is shifting? And how do we then get to the point where the way we design our program, the way we interact with this organization, and also show them the business case for it? Because at the moment, organizations think about, how do we get the staff and the employees to work, to get, to learn. But also beyond just that, to be able to add to what you talked about, the profit and all of those things. But how do we get employees to think, to be curious and to be creative about the future we can't even predict? Because what has happened with COVID is what we call the black swan. Nobody envisaged it. But in hindsight, we're always thinking, we could have seen it. But how do we then get our learning, our L&D to the point where we can help our organizations understand that we need to get more curiosity into the organization and become creative with helping them find solutions that is really meant for them and that can help them upskill their staff.
Yeah, you touch on curiosity, Wale, and I know Gillian was doing that earlier. This is difficult, isn't it? These are new times for L&D. We used to be just the kind of provider of programs, and the business would say, we need a course on this. Can you deliver that to us? But we're such a key player now in the way businesses perform and in how individuals are developed. Again, I'm going to touch on this in my presentation this afternoon. We're in the final few minutes, so I wanted to open the floor to everybody. Feel free to just jump in here, the panelists. It's more of a fun question, really, but what was the last thing that you felt you learned that really helped you do your job? And I'm going to ask a follow-on with it. Where did you learn that? Okay, was it from another individual? Was it something you looked up online? Did you search for it? Was it through mentoring? Did you go on a program? So I'm giving you a little bit more time by adding these extra sentences here. But I'll open the floor now to the panelists. What was the last thing that you learned that really helped you doing your job, and where did you learn it? Who's going to go first?
I'm happy to jump in, Ed, because I loved this question. And I know it and I can name it. So my last absolute learning was that we all know how important presence is, but I learned that I need to be present, fully present in the work that I'm doing, my clients, in order to have presence. And that can make a magical difference to the work that I'm doing with individuals and groups. And I learned that with Mary, who is one of the co-organisers on this programme, and I learned that on a learning programme that we are doing together. So that's my experience.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Be present to have presence. We're getting so many valuable takeaways here and quotable sentences as well. Thank you so much, Gillian. Always difficult to go first as well, so I appreciate that. Who's going to jump in next?
Ed, I'll happily share.
I can go next.
Go ahead, Wale.
Good enough.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We'll go, Wale.
All right, cool. So, good enough, Mary and Laban, because I'm seeing Laban is also on this call. The two things that really helped my career a lot is I learned it from them. And how do we do our work in a very serious way, but also in a way where we can invite learners to ourselves. Because if you look at the work we're doing itself, standing in front of the room, designing program, and all of those things, these are very serious hard work we're trying to do. But how do you also find ways to communicate in a way where learners can be at ease to learn from you? And I think the two people that I've seen so much do that a lot, I've seen Laban and Mary do this a lot in their classroom. And so for me, the key thing that's really helped so much is how do we do our work in a way where we can invite more learners to be open, to also push them forward in their journey.
A superb answer, and I always like it, being CEO of LPI, when people give other people recognition. So I'm grateful for that.
So I was really interested by what Gillian shared around being more present, because I tried to be more present. In fact, I set myself a real goal around that. It is really hard. So I need to go back to reworking on that to become more present. It's super tough. So congrats on the progress that you've made. I actually have something related, and it'll sound strange to say it's related, but I think it is. So I've been spending a lot of time at the moment around purpose. And the reason I think that's related is that, Gillian is talking about deliberate focus of your concentration, like in the moment. Whereas, of course, purpose is about understanding what is your focus and what you are wanting to flood your resources, right? Your time, your energy into, like, what are you trying to achieve? And I went on a bit of a journey recently using resources from different places. Some of it was courses on LinkedIn Learning. Some of it was TED Talks. I read a wonderful book, which was called Understanding Your Purpose and Living the Life That You Want to Live. And so using these different resources, I was kind of able to cobble together a bit more of an understanding around what purpose is, what vision is, and what values are. And it's been fascinating. Right? I'm not at the end of that journey, but I'm very much on that journey of self-discovery. And I've spent some time recently finding people who are in a similar position where they weren't quite sure what their purpose was or their vision or their values. but they were ready to ask themselves some of these difficult questions and kind of bringing them along that journey as well. So as you can probably hear, I'm really passionate about this, but I'm more of an enthusiastic amateur who is now becoming a lot more clear on what's really important to me in life, in the world, and what I'm really going to flood my focus on so that I'm as happy and fulfilled as I can be, and I'm going to bring other people with me in doing that same thing.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Tom. I think purpose has become something that's been forced into the forefront of a lot of our minds, especially in this current situation that we're in many countries with COVID-19. So I admire that you're taking it head on, having a look at it. I would encourage you and lots of other people to look up. I put it in the chat, Ikigai, Ikigai, which is a Japanese philosophy around purpose, which we're really keen on at the LPI. And we talk about it a lot. So listen, we're 2 minutes over time. It's been a really, really interesting session. I've made so many notes here. I've learned a lot. I'm really grateful to the panelists. I'm going to hand back to Laban and Mary, who've just been given a great shout out as well from Wale. Thank you, panelists. Back to you, Laban and Mary, before we.
Okay. So we're about 3 minutes past time. I do recognize that there are some questions in the chat that were not asked. So we'll move those questions to the breakout sessions as much as we possibly can. We are going to have now we've got about a 7-minute break. Amazing session and really, really grateful to our panelists. Thank you so much for shedding so much insights. You can exit the button now. You can exit the session now by clicking the leave button. But before you do, I just want everyone to share with us one key takeaway from this session in the chat. What was your key learning? I saw quite a number of people sharing. If we're saying, I will work on being present to have presence, very powerful state. I saw quite a number of people. Dinah sharing that L&D needs to make learning exciting and valuable. So can you just share a little bit in the chat, your key learning before we go off? Okay, Daisy says thank you to the panelists. We got a lot of thank you. It is hard to enforce learning organically. Be present and work with multiple realities. I see some Gestalt people in here. Joe Jackson says purpose. Ikigai, remember that. Ed shared that in the chat. To be curious and to have courage, the importance of creativity. Let's make sure we give our colleagues the freedom to learn. Love that, Ed. Caroline says L&D has taken center stage. So on that note, I'd like us to exit. And once you exit, please click the leave button. Go back on stage and you can join the body break. During the body break, there'll be some music being played. We have just about 5 minutes break, so you can join the body break. And then once it's 11:40, we'll go back into session 2. And we are all in session 2, okay? And it hasn't started yet. So please join the body break if you are not having a toilet break or a coffee break, okay? So thank you. Please leave and join the body break. Click the leave icon.
Mary, before we go, kindly, could you take us through the flow features that the delegates need to know? And then after that, we can go for the break.
Okay. So I shared a bit earlier, but I will share with you. There's a handout button that has a lot of the guidelines in there. So you can click in and you can get as much information as you can, especially for those that need an interpretation support or translation support. To get on the stage, to join the sessions, you have to click the stage button and you can click any of those sessions. You'll have to exit one session to join another session. And for those who are speakers or panelists, you need to make sure that you're not backstage. You need to always click the go live button. And as I shared earlier, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box. And I'll just like to remind the moderators, etc., during the sessions, just to keep checking the Q&A box, etc. I appreciate your comments. You can also speak to any of the speakers by going into the VIP booth. And if they are present, you can grab a seat with them. So thank you. Thank you. Join us in the body break. We'll be back. We'll start again by 11:40. We now have 3 minutes.